Hello, I'm Tom Bird. I'm the Fire Weather Program Manager and an incident meteorologist from the National Weather Service office in El Paso. Today, we'll be talking about the 2023 wildfire season weather outlook. Before we look at what we expect to see this year, let's look back at last year real quick. And these are the top 5 states last year as far as acreage burned from wildfires. If you remove Alaska, which is much bigger than any of the states down here, New Mexico was number 1 in acreage burned, and we had the largest and second largest fires in recorded New Mexico history with the Hermit's Peak, Calf Canyon, and the Black Fire. In addition, we also had the very destructive and highly impactful McBride Fire in Ruidoso. Okay, now looking back at last year, on the left we're looking at temperatures, on the right we're looking at precipitation. And what you're looking at is there's 128 years of climate record for each state. And so within each state we rank the years, those 128 years, from coldest to warmest and from driest to wettest. And see where they rank against each other, not the states, but not the states against each other, but the states against themselves in that 128 years. So what that means on the left hand side is for New Mexico, it was the 112th warmest year on average across the state out of 128 years. So that puts us above average. Then on the right hand side, 73 means it was the 73rd, either driest or warmest, however you want to look at it, year on record for 2022, which falls pretty close to the midpoint, which is around 64, 65. So that puts us near average. So that's how we fell last year for the entire year. So a bit on the warm side with slightly above average precipitation for the entirety of last year. If we break it up by month, and this is for the state of New Mexico, and this is the temperature averaged across the state, so kind of a general look at what the temperatures were looking like. We started the year out with near normal to below normal temperatures, and once we entered fire season, you could see we got back into that above average to much above average through the fire season and also through the monsoon season before we started to cool off to average and below, and once we got into the fall. So it was a warm fire season, not too bad going into it on temperature. Taking the same look on precipitation now, very dramatic what you see as far as the first 5 months of the year, except for March, which was near average but still on the low side. It was a really dry winter and a very dry early spring heading into fire season. In fact, we had the second driest April on record. Remember, that's out of 128 years. Then you notice in June, that big spike to where we went much above average on precipitation across the state. That was the early onset of the monsoon. And if you remember last year, fire season, large fire season anyway, kind of ended pretty abruptly and a bit early relative to what's normal when we got that first influx of moisture that brought a lot of precipitation in the state. So we kept pretty good rain through the monsoon, so it wasn't a bad deal. And then we actually even got a late bump in October. The monsoon like was going to shut off in September. Then we got a lot more rain in October across the state before we dried out back to near normal to end the year. So if you want to look at what that looks like spatially across the state, you can find out where you're at and what the precipitation each month looked like compared to normal in your part of the state, and also Arizona and West Texas. So you'll see, we talked about the first 5 months being dry, and those oranges, yellows, and reds, that all indicates below normal precipitation. So the redder it is, the lower the precipitation percent of normal is. And so look at April and May. You can see most of the southwest and southern portions of the state exceptionally dry with 0 to 5, 10% of normal. And then look at June. Remember we said that the monsoon showed up early, and there it was, mainly over the Gila area, basically west of the Central Mountain Chain of New Mexico is where we got most of our moisture. That was the early onset of the monsoon. Going to the the second 6 months, and you can see through the monsoon months of July, August, and September, we kept a fair amount of moisture across the area. A lot more of the area was closer to normal than above normal, but still a pretty good signal for some rainfall last year. And then remember we talked about October having another surge after a bit of drying in September, and so you can see that there in the charts. And then November we went back to the typically dry, and then December surprised us with a bit of moisture that we don't always see. So now that we've looked at the precipitation pattern from last year, let's look at what it did to our soils this year. So what you're looking at is the 1-year difference in soil moisture, and that's looking at about the first 3 feet from the surface and measuring how much moisture is in the soils. And anywhere you see the greens, the blues, and the purples, that's where the moisture in the soils today is more than it was last year today. So improvement basically, and most of the state has been improved, especially in those higher country areas like the Sacs, the Blacks, the Mogollon. You can see the burrows even show up there. That's areas where we got a lot of rain, and so the soil moistures are doing well. Now moving on to the soil moisture percentile. So in other words, we're looking at what's the moisture in the soil right now relative to normal. Anywhere you see the grays, that's where the soil moisture is near normal, what it should be this time of year. And in the blues are where the soil moisture is higher than it should be. And you can see most of the state of New Mexico from the Central Mountain chain to the west, we've got pretty good soil moisture near normal to above. And as you go east into the plains, you can see where they haven't had a lot of rain, those soil moistures are still riding below normal. The implications on this was the fact that we now have a really good fine fuel crop across the region, so a lot of grass. So let's talk about snowpack right now. This is the snow water equivalent for each of the snow basins across the area, and this was taken a few days ago, so I'm sure these numbers are lower today because we haven't had much snow since then. And down here in southern New Mexico, these numbers fluctuate pretty rapidly. After a snowfall, they'll jump to 200-300% above normal. Within a week, they're back to normal or below. And so, but you can see right now, this is a good sign. In years past, we've been very below normal in the reds, like below 50%, or even in the 30% range. And today, or a few days ago, we were 130 to 140% out in the southwest mountains, and then over 100% in parts of the Sacramentos, which is good for us. And you can see the other parts of Arizona and New Mexico are all looking really well too. Okay, now let's look at more recent weather history. And this is a 90-day temperature and precipitation departure going back through mid-December through mid-March. So upper left is your temperatures, lower right is the precipitation, and you see a pretty similar pattern in both. As you move north through the state and west from the Central Mountain chain, you see cooler and wetter than normal conditions in both of these charts. As you move south and east or into the plains and east of the Central Mountain chain, those areas have been drier and warmer than average, which is exactly the opposite in large part of what the forecast was for the winter. Going into La Nina, we did anticipate the whole state and the whole Southwest in general would be warmer than normal and drier than normal, and that hasn't been the case, so that forecast didn't verify too nicely for us. Here is going back 6 months now. I thought it'd be neat to go back all the way through mid-September to now and see what it looked like, and we pretty much the same pattern, but what you really see is out west, the western mountains, southwest mountains, a huge signal for much above normal precipitation across the western third of New Mexico, and still seeing that dry pattern over the eastern third of New Mexico. So here's what we've done with the drought. This is a 1-year drought difference or change maps, and on the left hand side is a year ago, and on the right hand side is basically now. And you can see that we've had major improvement in drought conditions with the rainfall that we did get last year and this winter. So we've gone from a lot of exceptional, extreme, and severe across the state, almost the whole state, to now only the eastern plains of New Mexico, where we haven't gotten a lot of rain, is the area with some drought concerns. This chart on top, each one of those black boxes is the fire season for that year. And so these lines and these numbers show the percent of the area of the state of New Mexico that was in each drought category. So you can see 2018, 2021, 2022 were pretty big drought years. You can see 19 and 20 weren't, and you can see where we're going into on the far right this year. Not a lot of drought in place in the state. And so if I look at this time last year and this time now, and we do these pie charts, and what I'm showing you there is the percentage of the state that was in the worst 3 drought categories last year versus this year. So we've decreased it from 78% of severe or worse to only 16%. So vast improvement from what we saw before. And this is the drought change class map. And so over the Gila region, we've changed anywhere from 3 to 4 class improvement on the drought. And all the state except for one little portion has seen improvement. So that's a good thing. So now let's shift gears and talk about right now. And right now, you may have known that through the winter we were in our 3rd La Nina winter in a row, which is not very common. It's supposed to bring us a warmer and drier winter season relative to normal. That actually did not pan out. We've been a bit cooler and a bit more moist than normal. So that prognostication for this winter in this part of the country didn't verify like we thought it would. But we've now transitioned into a neutral phase. So we're not in La Nina, which are the blue bars. We're not in El Nino, which is the red bars. We are now in the neutral state. And that basically is the sea surface temperatures in the Pacific along the equator. They're now close to normal, those temperatures. And the reason we talk about that is because most of the energy that the atmosphere uses to produce the storm systems is derived from heat out of the Earth's surface, and most of the Earth's surface is ocean. And so we look at those ocean temperatures because we find correlations between whether the ocean surface is warmer or cooler than normal and what the weather pattern seems to want to be most of the time. So right now we're in a neutral phase. We'll be that way through the spring, and then as we move into summer, especially into fall, it looks like we'll have El Nino going into winter this year. So the drought outlook, let's start looking forward now. Here's the drought outlook going through June. All that yellow you see over New Mexico, when they did this drought outlook last month, there was no yellow, it was all white, meaning that we wouldn't be in drought. But now they're saying, based on the fact that we're expecting some dryness, that there may be some minor drought development possible over those areas. But if you look out in western New Mexico and southwest New Mexico, still keep us out of drought through fire season basically. So here's our first outlook, and this is for April, since we're almost through March now, and that's what I was showing you. The forecast is for drier than normal. It's not a large hard signal on that. Same thing on the temperatures on the right hand side. You can see the signal is for dry, warmer than normal. And so if you look at the Gila region, just looking at those colors there, that puts the probabilities of warm and dry at 40 to 50%, and that's relative to normal. And then there's still that 33% chance that we could be near normal. That means you add those two percentages and you only have a 17 to 27% chance that we'd fall opposite of what these maps show, which would be cool and wet. So in this case, they're leaning towards warm. So going forward through fire season and into the monsoon season, you can see each month, May, June, July, and August, all show pretty good indications. These are now not leaning, but likely, at least for June, July, and August. The third orange color falls into that likely category where the chances are 50 to 60% that we would be warmer than we should be. Moving over to precipitation. Leaning chances for drier than normal going through May and June, and then July and August boasting equal chances, meaning there's no strong correlation looking at past data and history with neutral cases that we would either be above or below, meaning there's probably equal number of years we're above, below, and near normal. And so there's just no skill to be had by looking at those correlations. So equal chances that we could see any of those three outcomes. Then to finish out these Climate Prediction Center outlooks for September and October, On the top, the temperatures either leaning or likely warmer than normal, and on the bottom, staying in those equal chances for precipitation to round this out. So now let's again shift gears, and now we're going to look at what Predictive Services thinks about the season. And on top is the temperatures, warmer than normal to near normals, the way they're calling it through June. And then on the precipitation, the bottom row, drier than normal for March and April, and then they have it probably equal chances to near normal for May and June. And remember, in the last charts I showed you, they had drier than normal for those 2 months. So here's what their monthly significant wildfire potential outlook looks like. We're about done with March, but they thought it would be the lowlands and maybe the Sacramento, Guadalupes of south central and southeastern New Mexico. And that was due mainly in part to milder and frequently breezy, to those windy things like we're doing right now. As I record this, we're in a windy period, typically dry, and that would contribute to the above normal potential focus, the south and east part of the states, and those finer fuels for the most part where there's a lot of grass, and those fuels can dry out rapidly. We've been having some amount of moisture with most of these systems, so we've been keeping the RH up or putting down a little precipitation, so it hasn't been too bad. Moving into April, keep those same areas kind of expanded a little bit into southeastern Tucson, but still keeping it mostly lowlands, just some of that central mountain chain also involved, but not a lot of area highlighted for above normal potential. We go into May, and actually the state of New Mexico loses all its potential according to SWIC folks and the Predictive Services. And then we get into June, and this is a collaboration with all the GACs across the country. Nobody sees a good signal for above normal potential with all the rain that we've had, with these atmospheric rivers coming into the west and putting so much precipitation down, having good snowpack. And so we actually see no area with above normal. So wrapping up what they got, the drought, as I showed you, is much improved for all but the eastern plains of New Mexico. With fine fuels, there is a wide range across the state, but predominantly we're above normal on yields. So where you don't have a lot of snow to compact them, those grasses are going to dry out quick and be ready for fire once we get a week or two of drying. So they'll be quick to come back into play. But the heavier fuels will probably, with the relieving of the drought, will probably not be as volatile as they have been like they were last year. And the monsoon, I'm not sure where they're getting this information, how they come to this conclusion, but they're saying that the pattern will likely be late and near to weaker than normal, possibly wetter east of the Continental Divide, and either near normal or drier west of the divide. So they're thinking of less significant wind, which we haven't quite seen yet, that we would have a normal or delayed start to large fire season. And just FYI, and this I think is the last slide, this is the date on average when the ERC charts across each one of these predictive service areas reaches its peak and then starts to fall and goes down below, I don't know what percentile, but this is when we still have fires after these dates, but the probabilities of them being large project fires or campaign fires that drag on starts to drop, because this is when we start to see the monsoon moisture show up on average. And these dates can fluctuate from a week or two before or after these dates, but we're kind of looking at the last week of July, the first to second week of July, for us getting out of large fires. And so that's it. That's the outlook for this year. I hope it's helpful in some way. If you have any questions, call that number. Like if you have tactical, daily operational type questions, call that phone number. That's the number of the forecast desk here at the office. It's manned 24/7, and there'll always be a forecaster there that you can talk to, a meteorologist that can help you. And then if you have like program questions, something that's more strategic or something like that, and it can wait, maybe give myself or my boss an email, and we'll get back with you. We appreciate your time. Have a good season. Bye-bye.